into how we should respond. So the parsha begins, for those who are on Zoom. I'm just going to pull up the first second. Let me pull up the screen. Let me share it by the screen. I'm going to pull up the first pasuk in the parsha, because there's a Medrash Tanchuma that right away notices something very odd about the first pasuk in our parsha. So the parsha begins, Elu toldos Noach, Noach ish sadik tamim haya b'derosav, es Elohim ishalech Noach, which means these are the generations of Noach. Noach was an ish sadik, was a perfect sadik, perfect in his generations. Es Elohim ishalech Noach, that Hashem walked with Noach. And the Medrash Tanchuma notices why three times does it mention Noach's names three times? It could have just as easily said, Elo told us Noach, who is Sadik, who is Halachim Elokim? That would make much more sense. Why three different times does the parsha begin with the word Noach? And the Medrash says something very fascinating, because there are three different versions of Noach that we meet throughout this story. There's the Noach before the flood, and who he was before the flood. There was the Noach during the flood, and how he responded during the flood. And then there was the Noach after the flood, and how he responded after the flood. And it's not really relevant to get into the three different ways that he responded, and we see that he had a Yerida after the flood, whatever it may be. But the point is that throughout the different circumstances of his life, Noach responded in different manners, in different fashions. And I think that we ourselves, I think this very much relates to us. There's us before Shmini Atzeres this year, with this unprecedented, tragic terror event that we've all been through. And one of the most difficult parts of it all is that we sort of felt like we would never face anything like this in our lifetimes. Sort of almost emotionally unprepared. It's not something that we ever felt could happen or would happen. And then there's us when we found out the news, and the whole last week when we're sort of numb, thus during this tragedy. And then there's our response following the tragedy. And I think that we can't simply just go back to how we were and to how we lived. And it's important for us to recognize and realize that the world has changed, and we have to change in response to that. And that's really what I want to talk about today. You know, there's a Rashi and the Chachamim in the Talmud derived that Noach spent 120 years building the Teva. And the question is, why so long? I mean, the Teva was massive, but why should it take so long? I mean, Noach could hire a crew of workers and he could knock that out in a month, 2 months, a year, 2 years, a few years, 120 years. And the key to understanding that is where Hashem tells him, Aseh lecha teva. Lecha means not only for yourself, but I think it's the Arizal that says you should make it by yourself. That he has to make it completely by himself. And that's why it took 120 years. But why? Why would Hashem want him to do that? And so Rashi gives the answer, because everybody will see that Noach is building this teva. He's spending all of this time, all of these days, years after years, and they're going to come and ask the question. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And he'll tell them that Hashem is going to bring the storm and that we have to do tshuva. And in this way, the people will come to Noach, and Noach will convince them to do tshuva. But that doesn't answer the question, why did Hashem need Noach to build it himself? And why take 120 years? Let him build it quickly. Just the fact that there's this massive ark, this massive table on his front lawn, everybody's still going to ask the question. Why will they? They're not going to ask the question more that he's building it himself, as versus a whole team of people are building it. So why is this so relevant that Noach should build it himself? And the Rebbe gives us such an interesting answer. And that is that Noach, despite the fact that he was the tzaddik of the generation, despite the fact that he was the leading spiritual sort of spiritual giant in his time, but when there is a tragedy in the world, when there's an impending flood, it's not enough to have other people do it and you just give tours of the table. It's not enough to just be in our sort of intellectual or spiritual ivory tower. Hashem is telling him, and by extension, all of us, that when the world is faced with tragedy, that you have to roll up your sleeves, that you have to get involved, that every human being must get involved. And so this is why you have to build the table. The message from HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that we have to do the work. And similarly, in our times now, we feel, well, I'm not on the front lines. I'm a Jew sitting in Teaneck, New Jersey. What can I do? I could daven, I could pray for the soldiers, but what can I do? And the message of Parshas Noach is when there's a flood in the world, when the world is facing tragedy, when Klal Yisrael is facing tragedy, it's not enough to just sit back and watch those fight for us and hope that they'll be victorious. We have to get involved. We have to do our part. So the question is then, what part is that? What is it that you and I can practically do? And this is what I want to talk about today. There's a beautiful sefer called Or Gedaliyahu from Rabbi Gedalia Shor. He's one of the great American Gedalim, Rosh Hashiva of Torah V'das, and his sefer is filled with Chassidus and with Musar. And Rabbi Gedalia Shor asks a very good question in Parshas Noach. And it says, Ki hishchis kol basar. Why was the world destroyed? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to bring this flood? Ki hishchis kol basar. Because not only was man corrupted, but kol basar, all the animals were corrupted as well. They all went against their nature. All the animals also were so corrupt. And begin being intimate with other species, etc., which is completely beyond their nature. So says the Or Gedaliyahu, Rabbi Gedalia Shor asks a very good question. Animals don't have bechira. Animals don't have free choice. What do you mean? How could animals, ki hishchis kol basar, how could animals corrupt their way? Animals are programmed to run al pi teva. The nature that Hashem gave them, that's the nature that they interact with the world with. So how could it be hishchis kol basar? And he brings such a beautiful point. And he brings a point from the Mesilas Yesharim. Mesilas Yesharim, of course, the great Musar book written in the 1700s, Musar Sefer by Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. And in Mesilas Yesharim, if you take a look, this is the handout that I give. I just want to do a few words here. If you take a look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom. I'm going to pull it up here. We're just going to do a few lines. I'm going to pull it up here as well. 1 second for those who are on Zoom. Here we go. So 6 lines up from the, what is it? 8 lines up from the bottom on the right-hand side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 lines up from the bottom, middle of the line. Kelashin ha-Mesilas Yesharim. So he quotes the Mesilas Yesharim. What does the Mesilas Yesharim say? The Mesilas Yesharim is saying, and this is in Perek Aleph of Mesilas Yesharim, which is man's obligation to the world. This is the theme of that Perek. And he says, Ki im ha'adam nimshach achra elam. That a person has one of 2 ways that he can live. A person could live basically being drawn after his own hedonistic pleasures and just take part in Elam Hazeh and utilize Elam Hazeh in terms of the pleasure that it brings him. He says, if that's the case, that if a person is drawn after the pleasures of this world, selfishly, in other words, if a person simply lives their life with selfish intentions and distances himself or herself from the Creator in that way, he destroys, he brings destruction to himself. But not only that, that our actions have a profound effect on the entire world. That we are considered an Elam Katan. Every human being is a microcosm of the world. And the Or Gedaliel brings before this, well, I don't want to quote the whole piece, but he brings before this that when man was created, the last part of creation was man. And every element of creation was included within the creation of man. And this is why Hashem says, Nasa Adam, let us make man. Ra'alim Meforshim talk about that. What's the let us? Who's Hashem talking to? So the answer is he's talking to every element of creation. I am going to combine within man the animal, the plant, the vegetation, the earth, the inanimate. And man is going to include within man, this will be inclusive of every element of creation. And so therefore, however man behaves has a profound effect on the entire creation. So he says if a person behaves selfishly and lives simply selfishly to fulfill their own desires, if that's the whole reason why you're existing and you're alive, and you distance yourself from your creator, he brings down the entire world. But if a person has self-control and lives an elevated life, and lives a life of decency, a life of love, a life of kindness, a life of sensitivity, a life of giving, a life of sacrifice, and he attaches himself and he connects himself to something beyond himself, and he's living for something beyond himself to fulfill the entire purpose of creation. And he utilizes every element of creation, not for his own selfish gain, for his own selfish purpose, but to elevate the entire world. He utilizes physicality, not for himself, but to transform that physicality into something spiritual. He lives for his creative purpose. Who mis'alad, and the person himself experiences spiritual elevation, and the world is elevated together with him. He says, because this brings, when a person lives this way, this brings a tremendous elevation to all of creation. Okay, we'll stop there. We'll go back to just talking on the outside. So here the Mesilas Yesharim is telling us such a fundamental principle. This is why, says the Or Gedaliel, it says, Ki hishchis kol basar. What influenced the animals to become corrupt? He says it was the human beings becoming corrupt. That all of us, every one of us should realize and should feel. We're not helpless. We don't see it because we're living in Gullus. But every act that we do has a profound effect on the entire world. We are a microcosm of the universe. Every one of us. We are an Elam Katan. And everything that we do has an effect on the Elam Gadol. And that, says Or Gedaliel, is why Hishchis Kol Basar. Why did the animals become corrupt? Because the human beings were corrupt. And he says that every human being has a portion of the world that's connected to your neshama, a portion of the physical world that's connected to you. And it speaks about this in Chassidus as well, that every element of, and I've spoken about this before in the shiur, that all of the physicality that we own, our homes, our clothes, our cars, etc., they are all part of the physical world that was predetermined and predestined to be connected to your neshama. And your neshama and your aveda, whether you live selfishly or selflessly, whether you live simply for yourself or you're living for godly purposes, brings that element that you're connected to in the physical world, either an aliyah, a spiritual ascent, or a spiritual descent. That none of us can say that I'm just living in the four walls of my own home, and therefore whatever I do doesn't affect anybody and doesn't hurt anybody or help anybody. Not true. Parshas Noach teaches us the animals became corrupt because we became corrupt. We have a profound effect on the world. And what's important, what Parshas Noach is teaching us, is that we have to believe that. I once brought in this shiur. This is many years ago. when we were doing the shiur, this is pre-COVID, when we were doing the shiur the old way, like we are now, I once brought a beautiful Kedushas Levi from Parshas Noach. And the Kedushas Levi answers a very fascinating question. It says I'll pull it up on the screen here for those who are on Zoom. It says in the second Aliyah in Parshas Noach that when the flood waters began, let's share it to the screen here. When the flood waters began and then began raging, it says that Noach enters into the teva. But if you look at the language that the Torah uses, it says V'yavai Noach upanav v'ishtei unushay panav itay el hateva, that Noach and his sons and his wife and his daughter-in-laws all entered into the teva, and the pasuk ends mipnei mehamav. They entered into the teva because of the floodwaters. Now, the Kedushas Levi Yitzchak Berditchev notices something very strange there. What do you mean because? The Torah doesn't have to add mipnei mehamav. We understand why Noach's going into the teva. The Torah has been talking about for the first Aliyah and the beginning of this. The whole time the Torah is talking about this flood that's going to happen. So we understand the flood is happening and Noach enters into the teva. Why does the Torah add the words mipnei mehamav? That he entered into the teva because of the floodwaters. We know that already. So Rashi, you look at Rashi, and what does Rashi say? Rashi says something fascinating that's so difficult to understand. Rashi says, you know why it says mipnei mehamav? Because Noach wasn't going to enter into the teva otherwise. That he only entered into the teva because the waters forced him in. What do you mean? Didn't Hashem tell him he has to build the teva? Didn't Hashem tell me he has to go? Why is he only going in because he was forced to by the waters? That's mipnei mehamav. The Torah is telling us that he was forced to go into the teva. He didn't want to. And Rashi says, Af Noach mekatani amana hayit. That Noach was mekatani amana. He had only a little bit of amuna. His amuna was weak. Mamin ve'eno mamin. On one hand, he believed, but on the other hand, he didn't really believe. Sheyavei amabel, that the flood would come. He wasn't sure that the flood would come. And therefore, since he wasn't sure the flood would come, he didn't go in until the waters literally forced him in. That's what Rashi says. What does that mean? How could we say Noach Matani Amana? That Noach had little amuna? What do you mean? Noach spoke to Hashem. What do you mean he had little amuna? You and I could have little amuna. You and I can have weak amuna. But if Hashem talks to us, if we have a conversation, we're not going to have little amuna. It doesn't make any sense. Hashem was as real to Noach as the table and the chairs are to us. Noach experienced him. He conversed with him. He was a prophet. So what does it mean, Mikatani Amana? What is the Torah alluding to here? And the Kedushas Levi answers this in such a beautiful fashion. Why was it that Noach wasn't the first Jew? What was Noach's fatal flaw, so to speak? Why was Avram Avinu the first Jew? After all, we always talk about how Avram Avinu brought ethical monotheism to the world. But what do you mean? Noach believed in Hashem also. Noach was an ethical monotheist also. So what was the difference between Noach and Avraham that Avram Avinu was the first Jew and Noach was not? And the primary difference between the two was Avram Avinu tried to save the entire world around him. Avram Avinu went to spread the message of Hashem. Avram Avinu went out to spread the word that God exists and he demands moral and ethical behavior from his creations. Noach stayed home. Noach didn't go out. Not only that, but I'll ask you another question. Okay, Noach didn't go out. Why didn't Noach daven for everybody? Shem tells him he's going to bring the flood. Shem tells him he's going to destroy the world. Avram Avinu davened for the Rishayim of Sodom. Maybe there's one tzaddik Hashem shouldn't destroy. And Noach, we don't see anywhere that Noach davens for the entire world. In fact, he doesn't. This is the main difference between Noach and Avram. So, so one second. So says the Kedushas Levi. Kedushas Levi notes all of this. And he says so beautifully, he says there's two types of tzaddikim in the world. He says there's one tzaddik that basically his concern is for himself, for his connection, for his avodas Hashem. And he sort of wraps himself up in his own, Daled Amos. And he's concerned only for him, perhaps him and his family. And then there's another tzaddik, he says, who cares about the entire world. It's not enough that he has a connection. He wants to bring that connection to the whole world. He wants to elevate the entire world. Says the Kedushas Levi, Noach may have been a tzaddik, but he was mekatani amana. Why didn't he daven? He didn't daven because he didn't truly believe that his tefillos would matter. After all, the Shefet Kol Haaretz, the judge of the entire world, the creator of all, the omnipotent, perfect HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he already made this decree. Who am I to overturn his decree? What am I? Ma'ani, mi'ani, what am I? Who am I? That I should daven? That I should tell him he's doing something wrong? That I should change his mind? When Rashi says that Noach was Mektani Amana, says the Kedushas Levi, it doesn't mean he had little belief in Hashem. The Amunah, it's not talking about his belief in Hashem. The Chiddush of Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev is that Noach talking about the belief in himself. He was Mektani Amana in himself. He didn't believe, number one, that he was that much greater than anybody else. And if there's a flood that's going to come, he's certainly not going to be saved over everybody else. And if he's going to be saved, then everybody's going to be saved. And therefore, he didn't go into the teva until literally he was forced in. And the reason why he didn't daven is for the exact same reason. He didn't believe that his tefillos would matter. And this is the ikar difference between Avram and Noach. This is what we learn from Avram Avinu. That Hashem has elevated humankind, mankind, and by Matan Torah, Klal Yisrael, to be his partners in creation. That oftentimes there's a decree milamayla that Hashem makes, but he wants us to daven. We know the whole story of Avram and Sodom. The reason why that's recorded in the Torah is because Hashem wants that to be our response. We should realize and recognize that every one of us has immense spiritual power. And our tefillas do matter. And our mitzvahs do matter. And our actions do matter. And this is what the Parshas is teaching us with the story of Noach. And this is what the Kedushas Levi tells us. This is what it means. Noach is Mektani Amana. Yes, he believed full-heartedly in Hashem. The Kektani Amana was in himself. And this was his fatal flaw. And this is why he didn't daven for the world. And this is why he didn't go out into the world. And this is the message for us. Here we all feel so helpless. But we should know we're absolutely not helpless. That our tefillos matter, and they matter immensely. And our actions matter. And so here I want to bring in, and I spoke about this on Shabbos, but I want to bring in from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that after the Yom Kippur War, and the Rebbe answered the question that we all have now. What should we do? We're so helpless. What should our response be? And we see by the immense outpouring of people wanting to pack duffel bags and wanting to give supply, we all want to feel like we're a part. We all want to do our part. But we're all not necessarily sure what our part is. And the truth is, who am I to say what our part is? And I would never say on our own what our part is. I'm not qualified. So I'm telling you what the Rebbe said. And these are the Rebbe's words. And number one, let's talk about number one. The timing of this attack obviously was not accidental or coincidental, that it was on Simchas Torah, or Simchas Torah. And the brutality of the attack was obviously planned as well, because our enemies desired for us to be broken spiritually, to be broken emotionally, to be paralyzed, to be dejected, to be depressed. They wanted that from us. That's obvious and clear. And so therefore, I think our first, and this is real Aveda, but I think our first job is to raise our own morale and to raise the morale of Achenu v'Achasenu b'nei Yisrael, to raise everybody's morale. And that's not easy. It's not easy now to be besimcha. It's not easy now to live with joy. And the Rebbe noted that as well after the Yom Kippur War. The Rebbe spoke 3 days after the Yom Kippur War and gave this message. It's not easy. But this is what Avodas Hashem means. Avodah means it's work, it's toil, it's effort. But the Rebbe says we should recognize how powerful we are. He quoted a pasuk in Tehillim where David HaMelech says, Hashem tzilcha, Hashem is your shadow. And the simple explanation is, just like your shadow is always connected to you, never leaves you, Hashem never leaves you as well. But the Baal Shem Tov, the Rebbe quoted the Baal Shem Tov, who taught a deeper understanding of what it means, Hashem tzilcha, that Hashem is your shadow. And what it means is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world and empowered us. That he, as the Zohar says, as Serusa de Lasata, as Serusa de La'ela. When there's an arousal from below, that triggers an arousal from below, from above. This is what it means, Hashem tzilcha. Hashem is your shadow. Hashem imitates or mimics, so to speak, or responds to our actions. So if we are besimcha and we are in a state of joy, that will cause milamayla Hashem to bring simcha to Klal Yisrael. Hashem tzilcha, Hashem is our shadow. This is the power that we have, similar to what the Mesilas Yesharim was saying. Our mindset, literally our mindset affects creation. So we have to work on ourselves. And I'm telling you, this is, I speak to you as somebody who, I mentioned this on Shabbos. I'm jealous of those rabbis who are able to sort of disconnect, divorce themselves from their emotions and just lecture and just talk and just give the message. But for me, I'm not like that. My emotions are very much a part of my personality and at the forefront of my personality. And literally the whole week, I'm literally just a centimeter underneath my skin. I'm literally ready to burst into tears. And I've had that experience multiple times where I just burst into tears out of nowhere. And so it's real Aveda. But my simcha matters. And if for nothing else, what I tell myself, what really sort of helps propel me and compel me is that I will not give the enemies victory over myself. I will not let them win. I will not let them have that victory of breaking of leaving me broken and paralyzed and dejected. That is exactly what they wanted. And that's why the attack was on Simchas Torah. It was to take away our simcha. It was to take away our joy. It was to break us and paralyze us and leave us demoralized and dejected. And while that may have worked temporarily, I am not going to allow that to happen. I'm not going to let them have victory over me. So that's step number one. We have to raise our morale and raise each other's morale. We all need each other to do that. That is very hard. It's much easier for me to just be morose. It's hard to be besimcha now, but that's what's needed now. Yeah, Ivdu, exactly. It's an Avodah. And especially, that's in regular times, it's an Avodah. You know, for us Jews, we live with generational anxiety and generational trauma, and we're always waiting for the next shoe to drop. And it's hard to be besimcha. In good times, it's hard to be besimcha. We all have anxieties. In this time, it feels like almost an impossibility. But when we recognize that Hashem tzilcha, that Hashem is our partner, this is what the Rebbe said. It's not Rabbi Simon. I wouldn't have the audacity to say it, but the Rebbe can say it because the Rebbe knows and understands. It's from the Baal Shem Tov that Hashem is our shadow. Hashem will mimic us. So that's number one. And number two, I think it's important that we all recognize and realize, I mean, I'm sure, and we all do, that what's the underlying cause of this? Because this isn't simply a battle over Eretz Yisroel. This has nothing to do with Eretz Yisroel. It has everything to do with Am Yisroel. This has been going since Avraham Avinu brought ethical monotheism into a world filled with paganism and violence. From that time on, in every generation, they've attacked us. So what's the common denominator behind all of those who have attacked us, behind the Romans and the Greeks and the Nazis, and the communists in the Soviet Union who tried to obliterate Judaism, and our current enemies today, what is the common denominator? They're not simply coming for our land. They attacked us before but when we didn't have dominion over the land. You know what they're coming for? They're coming for our light. Because we, Am Yisroel, are the bearers of Hashem's light in the world. And so therefore, we who brought godliness into the world, who brought justice into the world, kindness, goodness, God-based ethics into the world, men who have evil in their hearts will always come for that light. Because that light exposes evil and says evil is wrong and says murder is wrong. The light that brought God-based ethics into the world, that's what they're coming for. And that's why they've been attacking us pre-1948. Since the times of Avraham Avinu, they've come after us. As we say, in every generation we've experienced this. We thought our generation, we would never experience anything like this again. And yet here we are. So we first and foremost have to understand this is about the light that we bring into the world. That's what they're coming for. And therefore, once we understand this, and once we know this, our efforts have to be, they came to extinguish that light. We have to redouble our efforts in making that light even brighter. Each and every one of us in our own lives have to understand and have to think, what can I add in my goodness, in my love, in my sensitivity, in my care, in my improvement, in my relationships, whatever it may be, wherever it may be. And we don't feel, well, is that really helping? All of the physical things are for sure help. But we have to realize and recognize this isn't simply a physical war. It never is with Klal Yisrael. This is our physical security and our spirituality are very much bound together. They're not two different things. They're not separate. They're not separable. They are bound together as one. And so we have to understand that our response needs to be not only physical, but it has to be spiritual as well, because ultimately this is a spiritual war. It's a war for our light. And so therefore we have to rekindle our light and redouble our efforts in making our light even stronger. And each one in our own lives knows exactly where we can make the light a little bit stronger. A little bit more tefillah, a little bit more davening, a little bit more chesed, a little bit more sensitivity and love and care, a little bit less attacking ourselves. I mean, it's obviously not lost on anyone that this unprecedented attack was preceded by unprecedented division in Eretz Yisroel. And I mean, this is our history. This isn't a chiddush. This is our history. Whenever we are divided amongst ourselves, we are our weakest spiritually and physically. This is the story of Purim. That Haman came and told Achashverosh, there's a nation that's mafur to mafuzar, that they're scattered, they're divided amongst themselves. Now is the time to attack. I'm sure this was not lost on our enemy as well. I'm sure they were emboldened by the incredible division that preceded this. And now, and this is our history. We get comfortable. We start fighting amongst ourselves. We get attacked. And we come together ba'achdus. And when we're together ba'achdus, we're stronger than any force in the world when we're together ba'achdus. And then we achieve victory. And then it gets calm. And then we go back to fighting ourselves. And this is the cycle. This is literally 3,000 years of Jewish history. And here we are. And we wonder why it says we're a stiff-necked people, right? We don't learn after thousands of years. So maybe this time, maybe our generation, we can keep the achdus and we can strengthen the unity. So this isn't coming on every one of us. There's not one of us that were exempt. You know, we talk about all the reservists that were called up. Every single one of us was called up on Shemini Atzeres. Every single one of us was called to duty on Shemini Atzeres. Every single one of us has to answer that call. It's not sufficient to say, I'm too depressed, I'm too dejected. Believe me, I understand that. We all feel that. But imagine if the physical soldiers say that. They can't. They don't have that luxury. We don't either. Every one of us has to join this battle. And our battle on the back lines is a spiritual battle. And it is as important as the physical battle. They both need to be battled. They both need to be fought. This is an unprecedented darkness like we've never seen in our lives. We have to respond with an unprecedented light that we've never seen in our lives from every one of us. This is the Rebbe's response. Klal Yisrael was shaken to their core. And that means we have to respond with our core. And our core is the Yechida Shebenefesh. Our core is the pure core of our soul, the Moda'ani of the Jew, the part that remains always connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the part that we have to respond from our deepest self. And we have to add and bring that light to the world, an unprecedented light to the world. And this is our mission. This is our job now. And not a single one of us could say, well, I'm exempt from duty. Every one of us has to add to that light. Every one of us should be making a cheshbon nefesh. And last week was difficult, and we're numb and we're paralyzed. Like I said, we can't give that victory. This week we have to now march forward, and we have to rise from these ashes and proclaim Am Yisroel Chai, physically and spiritually. Like I said in the very beginning, there was 3 Noachs: Noach before, Noach during, and Noach after. Similarly with us before Shmini Atzeres, Tavshin Pei Dalet, us during, and now us after. We can't simply just go back to what we were doing. We can't simply go back to how we were before. We have to elevate ourselves and elevate the world. That's the story of Parshas Noach. Ki hishchis kol basar. We affected the entire world. We brought descent to the entire world. We could bring Aliyah to the entire world. This is our mission. And this is our job. And this is the real message of Parshas Noach. And this is what the Kedushas Levi teaches us, that every one of us has this power. We shouldn't, the difference between Noach and Avram Avinu, they were both tzaddikim. The reason why it says that Noach ish tzaddik, he was a tzaddik, but he was lacking in one area. There's gradations of tzaddik. His belief that his actions truly mattered. In the pagan world, it was man's actions were infinitesimal, were nothing. What's man? We're a speck of a speck of dust in relationship to the entire universe. What power do I have in the face of the omnipotent God who decides and decrees everything? But Avram Avinu understood that's not the right philosophy. We have to recognize our power. We have to recognize our partnership with Hashem. And now every one of us is called. Every one of us is called upon to respond and give our partnership, our joy, our light. We have to bring to the world and bring to each other. That's the message of Parshas Noach. And this is the message that's always been there in Parshas Noach, but how relevant is it to us today? And that's what we have to live with. And Amir Hashem, every one of us living with this message, every one of us adding to that light, every one of us recognizing our tefillas matter, our extra mitzvahs matter, our spiritual strength matters. Every one of us responding to our core. Well, Parshas Noach teaches us anything, it teaches us this, will absolutely have an effect on the world. And so Amir Hashem, we're going to learn from Parshas Noach. And we're going to learn from Noach's mistakes. And we're going to put our joy into the world and redouble our efforts and rekindle our light and bring that light to the world and respond to the unprecedented darkness with an unprecedented light. You know, if it's one thing, if you take a look, and I'm just going to conclude with this idea. I've never been, on one hand, this week has been the hardest week to be a Jew in my life. Right? We've experienced a brokenness and a brokenheartedness that we've never experienced before. But on the other hand, the pride I have in being a Jew, and one element of that pride is I take a look at who our enemies are throughout history and the depravity of their evil. And you could judge a nation by who their enemies are. And if you could judge a nation by who their enemies are, it shows you the incredible good that is contained within every single member of Klal Yisrael. And there's a reason why our enemies don't ask before they attack us, are you liberal or conservative? Are you religious or not? They don't ask any of that. They attack us all indiscriminately because in that sense, they know the truth that underneath all of the layers, every single one of us contains an incredible light, an incredible force of goodness. And I'm so proud to be a part of a nation that is so good and so holy and has brought only goodness and godliness into the world and has transformed and continues to transform the world. And but you could, by the depravity and the depth of the evil of our enemies, we can tell the incredible depth of the goodness that is within every single one of us. And what an honor and what a schus to be a part of that nation. And that's who we are. But we have to live with that honor and live with that schus. We can no longer simply be paralyzed and dejected. We have to bring that unprecedented light to the world. And Amir Hashem, God willing, Hashem Tzilcha, as the Rabbi said, Hashem will emulate. If we bring an unprecedented light, that our light to the world, Hashem will emulate that light and bring the unprecedented light, the light that we're all waiting for, combine all of our lights together, the light of Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'imheira v'imenu, Amen. Yeah.